We now live in a world of cinematic franchises, to the point we've all, at some point or another, had to roll our eyes at the sight of another remake, another reboot, another spin-off. But these franchises always have to start with one thing: the sequel. And sequels get a bad rap, as they're usually viewed as a soulless cash grab, especially when the story was self-contained and really didn't require a follow-up. If it goes wrong, it can potentially undermine what we enjoyed so much about the original. But sometimes sequels don't just exceed our expectations, they actually surpass and outshine their predecessor. Sometimes sequels can be so good that they crop up time and time again on lists of the greatest movies ever made. But what differentiates these sequels, the best sequels, that steal the limelight from the original, from those that are just quickly consumed and forgotten? Well, it's important to remember that most studio sequels are just genre movies. They followed a formula with a strong cast and happen to hit gold. So the audience don't really mind if they see another buddy cop movie like Rush Hour 2, Ride Along 2, or Lethal Weapon 2. Or a horror movie like Scream 2, Saw 2, or Smile 2. It probably won't change their life or do much different, but it will tick enough boxes to at least be serviceable entertainment. And maybe some people will even prefer it to the original due to the bigger budget sequences. But this is why sequels tend to be looked down on, as at their worst, they are just rehashes. There's technically a different story and some new cast members, but it's the same old formula, as why would the producers risk trying something different after investing more money into what's already been proven to work? And that's what generic sequels often forget to ask. What's the point of even making this? Not just financially or for entertainment, but what's the deeper underlying theme of the story? Usually for an original to be a hit in the first place, it has to have something to say that the audience can connect to. For instance, The Matrix posed fascinating questions about the nature of our consciousness, and Jurassic Park tied itself around the theme of man versus nature. But although those sequels had their moments, they could never quite eclipse the original, as they have less to say. They have more to show in terms of action or more to explain in terms of world building, but none of it resonates as strongly with the audience as it's no longer about them bridging the gap between their life and the protagonist's journey. It used to be that original movies would serve as a great launching pad for auteur directors and gifted actors. Mad Max and Alien made Mel Gibson and Sigourney Weaver stars, and The Evil Dead, The Godfather, and Star Wars put Sam Raimi, Francis Ford Coppola, and George Lucas on the map. In these cases, the filmmakers produced a relatively low-budget passion project that became an unexpected hit, or at least made back enough money to justify doing it again. But this time around, the budget increased dramatically. For example, Mad Max jumped from $400,000 to $4 million. The Evil Dead increased from $375,000 to $3.5 million. And the Indonesian action classic The Raid went from $1.1 million to $4.5 million. In these sequels, the audience has essentially voted for more. They enjoyed the auteur's work and see real potential in their idea. So by entrusting the director with a larger budget, they've granted them the creative freedom to produce a movie with much bigger scope. So in some ways their sequel becomes the movie they wish they could have made the first time around. The passion hasn't run dry, as they were creatively constrained before and can now really hone their vision. So of course these sequels outshined the originals. The originals were merely low-budget prototypes of what could come next. James Cameron's Terminator was another classic example of a breakthrough movie that only got elevated by its sequel, with the budget exploding from $7 million to $102 million. But rather than just rehashing the first movie, which would have been so easy to do, I mean the same Terminator could have just been sent back every year to recycle that same plot again and again and again, but instead, identifying how high Schwarzenegger's star had risen since the first movie, Cameron made vital changes that made the sequel feel completely fresh. Now the Terminator is the good guy on their side, and there's an even more advanced model coming for her teenage son. So rather than it just being man versus robot, it's now robot versus robot, and the theme of what makes us human runs even deeper than the original as we can watch the Terminator protect and bond with our main characters. So the sequel now has a wider scope, bigger action sequences, a more emotionally engaging theme, and the charismatic action hero is now the hero instead of the villain. Everything about it outshines the original. But James Cameron has an unusual relationship with sequels, as not only did he make his own sci-fi franchise that he then handed off to other directors after the second installation, but he also directed the sequel to Ridley Scott's Alien, and interestingly, everyone tried to warn him not to do it, for one very valid reason.
They said, well, don't do that because, anything that's good in your movie will be attributed to Ridley, and anything that's bad will be attributed to you.
However, Aliens turned out to be one of those sequels that lots of people think is even better than the original. I personally don't, as I just marginally prefer the intimate suspense of one Alien to the excitement of lots of them, but the sequel works so well because yet again Cameron didn't just rehash the same story. He actually subtly switched it to a different genre. Alien is a horror movie, whereas Aliens is an action movie. They feel different because they're not trying to achieve the same thing. So by identifying what the first movie lacked, expanding on what the first movie said, and spinning each story in a different direction to uncover new aspects of the characters, James Cameron managed to direct two of the most highly regarded sequels of all time. In order for an audience to prefer the sequel to the original, they need something or someone new to be captivated by. That's why some of the most iconic movie characters tend to show up in the second movie. They test the protagonist in unique ways and serve as a game changer to the entire story. So you could say that the best sequels are all about casting. Whoever you add into the mix needs to bring something truly different that can stand out and steal focus away from the original stars. As unless the new characters can eclipse the old ones, it's harder for the viewer to not prefer the original, as it was their first time falling in love with that same character. When you look at lists of the 100 greatest movies ever made, the most consistent sequels to qualify are The Godfather Part 2, The Empire Strikes Back, and The Dark Knight. And these three examples are key to unlocking the real secret to producing a perfect sequel. Now there will be some spoilers here, but let's be honest, these movies are so famous that this is basically all common knowledge. Unlike a lot of sequels, all three of these stories serve as the middle piece of a trilogy. The first movie is about the hero's origin, the second movie tests their limits, and the third movie concludes their journey, either in success or failure. The first arc will usually have the hero lose their mentor and have to learn how to lead without them. But then the second arc isn't just about testing their physical and mental limits, but the character's values. The Godfather is about a son taking over the family business, and at the end of the first film, we see that wow, he really will do anything for his family. But then in the sequel, that exact value is tested, when his own brother secretly betrays him. So now how will Michael protect the family business from his own family members? How far is he willing to go? In The Empire Strikes Back, Luke famously discovers that
I am your father,
which completely reorientates his understanding of his own identity and his perception of the Force. There's more at stake for him now. Will he be willing to take down his own father in favor of the Jedi, or will his father lure him to the dark side? And in The Dark Knight, the Joker tries to make Batman break his one rule of never killing by pushing him through the meat grinder of moral dilemma after moral dilemma, including choosing who lives and dies between the love of his life and the man he thinks can turn Gotham into a better place. So what does he value more, himself or the city? This is what an audience finds even more engaging than the protagonist's rise to power, as it's no longer just a simple good guy versus bad guy story. Now it's showing the moral grey areas that our hero wishes they could unsee. The first film demonstrates who they want to be and how they want to solve problems, and the sequel reveals who they will have to become and what they must be willing to do to achieve their goals. So they're going to have to change once again, but that change will not come from light, but from darkness. This revelation makes the sequels a much more powerful, challenging, and memorable piece of work. As much fun as the originals were, going from zero to hero, they can't quite compete with the harrowing levels of personal adversity the hero must face in the sequel, and ultimately, who they must reveal themselves to be. So when you're watching a sequel and you're noticing it's not quite hitting home for you like you'd hoped, it's probably because the movie isn't taking enough risks. Instead, it's trying to preserve the same scaffolding as the original, and not play with the formula too much or make any long-lasting changes. So that way they can always circle back and just spin that same record one more time if the audience buys enough tickets. Whereas the best sequels, the ones that eclipse the original, risk it all. They make narrative choices that there's no coming back from. Because they're not trying to preserve anything. They're trying to blaze a trail. Well, if you've made it this far, firstly, thank you for watching, but if you could now give the video a like, possibly even leave a comment and click on that subscribe button, it will encourage that mysterious algorithm to do its thing.